Hello and welcome. I'm Asha Saxena, founder and CEO of World Leaders in Data and AI. And this is AI Talk Show. I get to see you every week and talk about real problems. If you're here for the first time, this is not a panel discussion. I just want to make sure that you know that we're not doing a keynote. We're doing real conversation with people who are actually inside the hardest problems in data and AI. It's close to my heart because I've spent so much time and so much experience in this industry. I truly believe that these conversation is really what is important, not just talking about what's possible, but also dealing with what's real. And in every single episode, we try bringing that to our audience, our LinkedIn audience. I truly believe this is our community, our people who are sitting here and talking about this. And if you're here for the first time, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. You know what this is. You know that we really make sure we spend time on talking about real problem and don't waste your time. Today's topic is one that I have been wanting to dig into for a long time because there is a conversation happening right now in boardrooms, in healthcare systems, in government agencies, in technology companies all over the world about AI and data, what it means to actually make decisions with confidence in 2026. But most of these conversations, I would say, are surface level because people get excited about these tools and they talk about the possibilities of these tools, these models. But what really gets stuck is that they talk about these problems, they put it into pilots and proof of concepts, and then they wonder why it can't scale. I would say a lot of people are not talking about the real challenge, the foundation underneath all of that. I think a lot of us who've been in the industry for a while understand how difficult that can be. And I want to talk about that today because there's a number that I feel like is important. And as I was doing my research, it really stopped me when I found out that the United States healthcare system actually loses $300 billion every year, not to fraud, not to poor clinical outcomes, and not to operational waste in traditional sense, but to bad data. And I think a lot of us know about the challenges bad data can really bring to us. But think about it, $300 billion, 14% of total industry expenses just gone because the data that powers the decision is broken at the source. And this is not just healthcare problem. Healthcare just happens to be the place where the bad data actually is most visible, most urgent, most human consequential. Every industry, and I get to talk to a lot of the leaders in the industry through Wilda and the work I do with world leaders in data and AI. But what I see that this is what is actually the problem in every single industry. The question is whether you know where your bad data is hiding. And that's what this show is about. The reason this talk show exists is because the leaders who are going to shape AI actually are not just the people who are solving the best algorithm or model problem. These are the people who are running the organization. These are the people who are making the calls, and these are the conversation those leaders need to have, the honest ones, the ones someone else, I would say, that is talking about where the system is broken, the conversation that are not happening loudly enough. And for that, I'm so excited to have my guest today, who spent 30 years working with the data across retail, across multiple industries, carrying hard lessons from each one into the next. Karl, I'm really excited for you to be here. You are the current VP and Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Stanford Health Care, which means you are the person responsible for making sure that when data powers a clinical decision, it gets it right. And you sit between the world-class research institution, which, of course, I'm sure you're proud to work for an institution like Stanford Health, but also is a complex system. One of the most complex, I would say, highest stakes data environment in the world. And from where you are, the problems of the data is not just theoretical challenges. These are every morning problems for you. And I'm so glad that you are here to talk to us about what's happening in your world and how you're really dealing with this situation. So Karl, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Asha. You just kind of made my job feel a little bit harder than it already is.
I don't know if that's possible.
So working across Stanford Health Care, I also have Stanford School of Medicine. So, you look at the two of those together and you have the practice of medicine and the learning and the systems of medicine and all of the research behind it. So very different needs on those, but yet at the same point in time, it's all of that data is the same underneath the covers. So how do you standardize all of that data? And we're talking hundreds of petabytes. So it's not just the straight structured data. There's so much unstructured and new data that's coming up all of the time, especially with genomics, and with different types of imaging and other modalities that come in there. How do you make this usable for any question that may be asked? Whether that's how many patients have I seen, who's likely to return into the hospital, or what type of cancer cells can be treated in X way. So, I mean, it really is all over the place. And this is where you start to get into the difficulty of the job is actually getting it clean and standardized so that then people can build upon that foundation.
I think everybody who's listening right now, first of all, has a gratitude towards the work you're doing, because the work you do impacts human life. It impacts all of us in some shape or form. And the having that data clean is so critical. But when we talk about AI, there's a version of this AI, of course, in healthcare story. But honestly, I would say that in every industry, there's a story about AI being incredible. But think about clinician asking question in plain language and getting instant answers. And we all get excited because we don't have to look at the dashboards or read the data, because data is going to tell us the story in a clean version. And I think that's the promise which all of us as users kind of see. And I'm sure users in your organization is also hearing about the possibility of AI. But there is another version, the version where AI is giving two probably different answers for the same question clinicians are asking. And the problem is with that, the patient is in the middle. So when you get something wrong in healthcare, it can actually have a big impact. How close do you think you see the second version? How close are we to the second version than first version?
Yeah, so a lot in that statement with one, it's even if all of your data is clean and you've got it organized and you're working well, you put something like a Claude, Gemini, or a GPT on it, you're no better than a 50-50 coin flip on getting
Yeah.
the same answer twice. So it really comes into now there's a different level of modeling and a different level of work that has to be done behind the scenes in order to match that data into the processes. So you're really getting into that process alignment with your data and then being able to understand the questions that are going to come. There's a big tuning effort that goes into it. And even then, you're still maybe 95% on being able to replicate answer to answer. So there's a lot more work involved in this and getting it, 100% replicatable over time. And that's, I think, where we start to look at what questions are we trying to answer? How are we tempering what we roll out? Because you don't want it to be wrong. You want people to trust and feel like this is always going to be there. So there's a lot of work that you're going to have to do under the covers in order to make that possible. It's very cool though, because when I got into healthcare 8 years ago, the first thing the doctor said is, I really just want to be able to tap my badge and have the computer ask questions. I can ask it, it answers and is able to do anything and come back with that. That back then was a little bit further down the road out of sight, more sci-fi. Today, that is a very clear ahead possibility. The components to execute that exist. And now it just comes into putting it into a flow where people feel comfortable with it and they can trust it, and that you're able to get the right data underneath the covers for them to be able to get the answers that they're looking for. Because really, you want them to be able to follow threads and continually ask questions. That's one of the bigger problems that we have with dashboards and reports is that you've already assumed every question that can be asked and you've already packaged it up. So what happens when people hit the end of that wall? They can't go any further. And this is really allowing for that exploration as we go forward.
You talked about, kind of automating the dashboard and having people answer. I feel that this is such a great opportunity for us to really rethink our processes, rethink what we are automating. The questions we are asking, are these the right questions? And really rethink of how can we actually use this time to not create agent for something that's not working, rethink our business models and see, can we be more creative and more effective and really automate to get the better results. You came from retail and multiple industries, but I'm guessing there was a significant moment after you crossed into healthcare when something happened, you realized, oh, this is not the same game at all. Because if you really think about retail, bad data means you overordered maybe a winter coats, or any product. In healthcare, bad data means someone gets the wrong medication. You know, it's not just the productivity problem. This is the patient safety problem. Have you seen, or has there been a moment that scared you or showed you that we need to really be more cautious?
Yeah, well, so obviously healthcare is personal to everyone. So
Mhm.
let's go and establish this. We've all known someone, or we may have personal experience ourselves with our own health and wellness, and being able to get tuned medical care to us. And this is where you start to see generic treatments or more things that are given to the mean, not necessarily being the right treatments for the individual patient. So as we start to look at how do we get to precision medicine, which is really geared towards specific treatments for us as individuals, that's where we start to get into real big data problems. I mean, you start to look at a tremendous amount of information, not just all of your history within the medical establishment, but also is there genomic information that can be brought to bear? Is there other imaging or other tests that can be pushed into this? So now I'm looking at a multimodal problem of being able to break it down. And it gets into if you get those things wrong, obviously you're down a wrong path and the treatments can take a long period of time. And maybe the patient is able to stay with things, or maybe they're not and they give up on it and then they go off on their own. This really gets into if you can get things right, now you're able to work with those patients and really, I would say, get tremendously better outcomes for them. It is you start to look at personalized medicine going forward. This builds out a trust between clinical teams and the individual patients. For me, I look at this and go, how can I provide enough information for people to be able to make the best decision possible without having to worry about, oh, I need to see the things, the data behind the covers. It really is a trust, not only for the clinical teams, but also for the patient to make sure that they have everything that they need.
Do you see that in healthcare, the trust is harder? Like I was at a panel discussion last week, and I had a clinician in the audience, and she stood up and said, I don't trust the system. Doesn't give me the right information. How can you actually build agents on top of it and expect clinician to actually trust it? Do you hear that? Do you hear that clinicians or the frontline workers are not ready to adopt?
I think it depends on the organization that you're in and the amount of investment that you've had working with the clinical teams on being able to build that trust.
Yeah,
I happen to be very fortunate to be at an institution where it is an academic medical institution where it is teaching and trust and building out those relationships at the bedside with the clinical teams so that they have more of an awareness and understanding of how things are done. I don't want to take the credit for that. There are tons of people at Stanford who've built this up over time. I feel lucky to be a part of this and also to be able to then continue to build on this. So, but I will tell you right now, I am a little skeptical of the agents always doing good
yeah.
because people are very willy-nilly with it because it's very cool and it's going to get a lot of benefit. But if the data is polluted in any way, shape, or form, it's going to continue to propagate that. So there has to be ways of building in checks and balances as you roll these things out. So I think with the right way of being able to roll these things out into the organization and the right change management structure, it can be done successfully. but you have to think through things. You have to understand how the processes work. You have to understand how people work, and you have to understand how the underlying technology can do good things and can do bad things. So I think it's just a matter of being very thoughtful in how you leverage these technologies.
I like what you said about being skeptical. I think it is good to have some kind of a balance. Good to be optimistic about it, but also create the balance with really thinking through what these models can do, good and bad, together. But even if we talk about the models, even before we talk about the models, I think there is a structural problem you're working inside healthcare system every day, because there's at least 20 different ways to code a systolic blood pressure in standard US medical terminology. And there are about 47 different ways to code COVID positive test results, not only 47 different systems. So think about it. If you have 47 different codes within the same standard, when you're building AI model on top of that data, you might be treating 47 different entries at a 47 different events. So you're living with really a complex data structures and data management and metadata. But nobody's wrong. Every code is technically correct, but the system itself is incoherent when you're thinking about the fair description of what you're actually living with. So how do you even begin to fix something like that that isn't really wrong? It's just deeply structurally inconsistent.
Yeah, so healthcare data is interesting. I'll go with the ICD-10 codes. There's 610,000 roughly of these codes to go through. Data management becomes key on making sure that these things are, one, accurate, used correctly. So there is a big emphasis on doing the fundamentals right. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So how do you automate that? That is the big key, is how do you move towards agentic data management? So how do I leverage these small language models, which are very focused on master data, reference data, or things that I know and can control? So leveraging small language models more appropriately within different stages of your development cycle or within your organization to appropriately manage that. That's one of the keys to look at. Large language models are interesting, but they can't be expected to span everything and come back consistently. And this is where those focused small language models and really dissecting the problems that you're trying to solve comes in. And as we look at technology advancing, the agentic data management, like being able to populate what is this data, having tools that you're building and working through where now it can start to help supplement the amount of time and the amount of people that it would be necessary to really get the data in a state to be able to be leveraged like this. And that's where I think we've started to hit some strides in the last year and a half overall with technology. But I also look at like the things that Claude Code have brought. There's some things that have just happened in the last 2 to 3 months that are just astounding on being able to look through and see how stuff works, how it relates, and backwards engineer. Like, how would I execute things in a different architecture that were already legacy build, and how do I deconstruct it? Having Claude be able to go through there and just kind of execute things that would take months for an analyst to get through. That's really helpful for us to be able to look at how do we clean up and move ahead. Because sometimes when you're moving fast, you have to have a little bit of technical debt in order to execute, and then you have to go back and fix it.
Yeah.
But if you can fix it quickly and you can fix it with, different agents that you create, it now becomes, wow, that's okay. That's really cool. And you can start to move faster. But yeah, you need to be looking at quality always and the outcomes that are achieved.
And they say when you're thinking about quality, create those small wins where you can actually, start small, make sure you can show some success and then scale so that there is, trust building at that time too.
Yeah, and that's part of when you look at moving towards a platform and a product model is really finding product use cases that you can get learnings out of it. So you don't want to tackle the entire scope of an area. What you want is you want to be able to focus on having that product team, which includes, the clinical leader, the person who's the informatist who's helping with how the data looks, and then you have the technical team behind it, and that team focused on being able to tune and tweak things to get the right results really pays dividends because now I can look at what can I automate, what can I scale, and how do I want to solve this going forward. So that's really where you start to leverage that product model of being able to now iron out the wrinkles to where I can recreate things at a bigger scale for all of the different modalities.
Is the in your organization, have you started seeing the organization shift from the roles now that you have the AI engineers coming in? I mean, there are so many different titles now as you think about organization. Have you seen or have you applied any kind of shift in your resources, the people resources, and are you using agentic platform for replacing any of the human skills?
Not today. We're looking at roles and what it'll evolve to. I mean, anytime you're looking at career paths and developing of
Yeah.
people, it goes into, okay, so I was an developer and I was working in X tool. Well, really, you're looking at how data is utilized and moves in order to solve different problems. So trying to raise it up from a functional perspective, because the tools are going to shift pretty quickly. So how do we help our team and our employees really morph and grow into those roles as they go forward? It is a very fast moving one, and I don't know if any organization will be able to do it well as things go forward. So people spend a tremendous amount of time building dashboards, reports, all of these artifacts.
Yeah.
And as this environment starts to change over the next year to 2 years, you go into, well, what about creating all of those
Yeah.
products? Does that really then go into interpreting that data for people? I mean, so that does that morph into more of a functional analyst going
Mhm.
forward? And that's part of what you have to look at as you do long-term architecture of an organization.
You know, when you spoke about all the different pieces where you sit in Stanford, I was smiling because you're dealing on one side, you're dealing with the world-class researchers who think about data as a scientific asset, and they need, months of validation before it touches anything. And on the other side, you're working with the healthcare and the academia who needs answer in 60 seconds, or they already have made a decision without it. So you're serving kind of both side, all the three sides of the world simultaneously. Which one do you think which one do you disappoint more often than the other?
Well, I hope I'm not disappointing anybody on this one. Um, the big thing as we go forward is building a platform that then
Uh,
can be able to service those multiple needs. So one, coming from telecommunications, banking, all of these different industries, it's all data at time to be able to answer any question going forward. So holding to those principles, you can start to look at getting everything that's needed and then being able to, I say, branch it out,
yeah.
creating an enclave for people to be able to execute to their specialized needs. So not relying on long-term batch processing to be able to answer the what's now, moving towards more of a real-time event data management strategy allows us to be able to help answer clinical questions at time, but being able to capture everything that happens within that healthcare sphere allows for the research on what was going on, what works, what doesn't work, what are the little things that people want to be able to study and execute to. So it is a large, daunting task to be able to do, but also remember it's not necessarily going and servicing every one at a time. It's more of having a framework for being able to address things on that larger scale.
You know, so I want to go back to another thing which you were talking about is killing the dashboard. Um, do you feel that people or the users actually know how to ask the right question? Do you think that there is still going to be a place for dashboard while we are building these automated agents that can answer your questions?
Yeah, so killing the dashboard, let me do the air quotes around that one. It's the reliance on dashboards. So dashboards shouldn't be the end all be all of what we produce. So everyone likes to say, well, I need to have a dashboard. Well, it goes, why? What are you trying to achieve? Assume I'm Harry Potter and I wizard something up into your lap. What are you going to do with it? We
Yeah.
really should be focusing on actions. So as we drive forward, one of the programs we're trying to get to is actionable intelligence. We want to make sure that you have the ability to act on the questions and having the information at the appropriate place and time. And that is a change and a shift from dashboards and reports to really focusing on what is the information you need to make that decision and where do you need it? Is it in the EHR? Is it in a different type of tool? Is it within a mobile application? So really focusing on more of how people use information to execute as opposed to just producing a flat product.
Right, right. So, we spoke about a lot about how the agentic world will change, moving to automating, having the right data set and getting the right use cases. How do you build the foundation? You've spent so much time, and it's not the first time. The trust has been an issue, privacy security has been an issue, and in healthcare, the governance is critical. How do you, and in your organization, how are you thinking about data management, data security, data governance? And what are the uphill battles? Like, if you had to truly be honest about it, what are the biggest challenges you're facing? And what are you doing about it?
It's always culture. So no matter the organization or wherever you go into, it's the culture of trying to get people to work together on things, and also get into kind of over some of their fear of it. If you just look at the ability to secure things, bringing it behind an environment where you're not putting the data out into the ether, you're working with it in a more secure way. That may cost more because you're putting more of that data into your environment as opposed to parsing it out to different places. Okay, that's fine, but at least you're addressing the security. There are things like tokenization that you can use to be able to de-identify it and then re-identify it once you come to outcomes. A lot of this is also getting people over the ways that they've worked in the past and going into how do I work in the future? How do I want to work in the future? As you look at DevSecOps methodologies to be able to do this deployment, as opposed to always creating a ticket. So how do I automate things securely? And that just requires working with people to sit down and think through the problems and how would we do it without dragging the legacy processes and things behind us. And that is really culture at every organization. From a governance perspective, you have to look at data as an asset. Matter of
Yeah.
fact, it's a strategic asset going forward. It is what will differentiate you within the market and also help you in your journey, whether that is saying physically solvent or, being able to take over an area or whatever you're executing from a strategic standpoint. And that's why I don't like to look at it as data governance from a negative. This is really strategic enablement and how are we leveraging and best managing our assets. Once you get to that mindset, you start to realize all of the AI stuff is not possible if you're doing this. And really, all of these decisions, you don't want to sit there and spend all of your time on these level one problems. You really want to move on down the road. And that's why we really have to address that level of data management early.
So, I have to ask you this question because everyone in the analytics or data world is thinking this right now. As you're describing a world where a clinician can ask a natural language question and get an answer directly, and that's what the world we are kind of moving towards. And we don't need data analysts. The models can do the query in the middle. And a lot of people who are right now data analysts, these jobs are moving upstream. And we talked a little bit about the people in the job, what's going to happen to them. But I want to ask you something that I feel that this move is not painless, right? The analyst who's been writing SQL for 15 years or more are now automatically becoming AI governance expert. What is actually happening in the industry? What do you think? What's going on?
I would say that it hasn't moved as much as it will move, but you start to look at I think we do have an opportunity to work with people to set them up for success in the future. And this really comes into understanding the processes, how data impacts the different processes, how it's used in decisioning. So it's not just, hey, I'm going to explain what's on this report or I'm going to be able to go through it. It's really getting them to kind of do those bridge jobs of knowing the processes and knowing the data. And this is going to be, I'd say, growth opportunities for a lot of people to be able to move from just doing one thing within the organization to now having to understand multiple things. And I do think that is a good opportunity for people, but it's also going to be daunting because where people have been very focused, if I just look at straight SDLC, you look at people doing this, I mean, like just engineering. Well, I mean, then I hand it off to this person and then they're going to do this and they're going to do that. All of these things start to get compressed and you look at people doing multiple roles inside of there, but that also opens up an opportunity to now become more product focused. So now they become very like business oriented. So they understand bigger business problems and they can work within a team that's addressing that, as opposed to we're just going and slicing off different things like reports or dashboards. It really allows, I think, for a different focus of what you're delivering as an organization. I'm trying to be a lot of optimism on this one because, it is hard to look at if you automate all of these things, and we're a knowledge-based economy. So that was a decision that was made long ago. If you're a knowledge-based economy and you're starting to address a lot of these tasks in automation, how do you pivot your workforce to stay ahead of what I'd say are short-sighted decisions?
I want to spend a little time on where we are moving towards is the intelligence. When we think about actionable intelligence, what I want to start with is what is non-actionable. So it's actionable intelligence is not a report with the red metrics that someone prints and puts in a binder, right? It's not a dashboard showing readmission went up 3% last quarter with nothing that follows it. Every piece of data that is surfacing or is coming up or showing up, uh, how do you have a real example, not a pilot or a proof of concept, something that is live at Stanford Medicine right now, which is in your mind would be actionable intelligence?
Well, you start to look at some of the chatty HR stuff and some of the models that they put in there. I mean, they're very summarized, but there's also, let's just take the old school data science models of this, of being able to look at length of stay predictors, as well as you start to look at things of deterioration indexes. So having those scores now not just be independent things, but now actually be inserted into the medical record and start to go into, as a clinician looks at this, they go, okay, they're starting to deteriorate. Why? And being able to put in, well, this is how this, model got its score into this. It's really the integration of a lot of things that have been independent for a while into the workflow and being able to put in the whys behind it. While, I mean, you have simple models like that. I mean, this is going to get more complex and a lot more into, well, I don't see anything on any of the tests that I've run. What are some other tests that I can do with this patient? That's where we're going to start to see this grow and
Mhm.
get into that next level of analytics and being able to ask questions that you weren't able to always predetermine. So that's where we're starting to move quickly, and that's kind of the beauty of it. You're going from, I would say, just inserting the old metrics within that flow, and to the data science and into the generative AI. And now we're going to get into gen analytics where it's really what should I do with a patient? And that is also well, you better be right. But this is why you still have the clinician making those decisions. You provide them the information, you provide them the reasoning, and let them use all of their training and their expertise in order to execute on that. So I see this as more of how do you provide them information as they ask it, and how things got there, in order to do it.
I feel like we're in the age of intelligence. We all are going to be having a lot more intelligence, but what we do with it is going to distinguish us from somebody else. I think it's your competitive edge is not just your IQ, but it's your EQ. How can you intelligently understand what to do with this information when everyone has access to this? When I think about this age of AI or age of intelligence, what keeps you up at night? Like when you're really going to work, what is it that worries you the most? At work or otherwise.
So I have kids in the college age spectrum, and I worry about how they learn. So I grew up in an age where going to the library meant there were books and you were
Yes.
actually going to be reading and studying them. I visit my kids in school and I go to the library and everybody has a laptop and is doing other things. The books are kind of there as decoration almost. So it's interesting. Whereas I'm going through the legal library studying cases in school. So I'm doing a lot of memorization. Same thing with clinical. I mean, they're memorizing as many things as possible as you can. What happens when that's no longer needed?
Yeah.
So it becomes, can I capitalize on having that information automatically at my fingertips and be able to think through it? And I think that this should change school, hopefully for the better, to where people are going back to learning how to think.
Yeah.
It's not memorization. It really is, how do I leverage all of these different assets and tools that are there in order to put together new knowledge? And
Yeah.
that's my biggest fear, is that education system is slow and not compensated or measured accordingly to that.
I feel like education system and healthcare both critical to humankind, and both needs disruption. And I think in healthcare we're kind of moving towards that. And I'm hoping that education system really changes with AI. And I'll tell you why I'm excited about education system, because learning has become much more easier because you have an AI tutor. Think about just not memorizing, the formulas or equations, but understanding why that equation exists in first place. So think about if our kids, our students actually really invested in learning the meaning behind their studies. How great that would be. How great it would be for us to go back and truly understand the algebra equations, algebra formulas. uh, so to me, I think it's changing how we interact with our students. I teach at Columbia University, and we have faculty meetings, and we talk about this often. How do we incorporate AI? I teach AI, at Columbia. So I encourage my students to use AI, but I always say that I want you to use different models and tell me what questions you asked and be able to debate the answers with me. So you found these answers. How would you think differently? And I think that's really important, because now you have a lot of information. So it's not just one book you're reading. You can actually refer and learn about different books, but you truly understand the concept. And how do you use that concept to apply it into your studies in your life? And how do you think critically, I think becomes so, so important.
I actually have found some different use cases for, so I grew up, both of my parents are professors. So I grew up in just a learning environment as a kid, and probably has scarred me forever because I always am very curious about just everything. One of the first use cases I had for Notebook LM was I love philosophy and religion. So I
Oh,
wanted
that's
to put
great.
in all of the works of different people and actually kind of argue with them and be able to see their perspectives on different things. How would Immanuel Kant and Aristotle argue with each other on certain things? So you start to get into, there are things that are very creative and possible, like having sounding boards on different frameworks or different thoughts and philosophies on life that are there, that are not just math, science, and computers. I mean, this is kind of opening up a possibility of interacting with people or things or ideas that you never would have had in the past from an opportunity perspective. So I think there's not just the math, science, computer perspective that you look at. There's also areas for art and philosophy, to be able to open up and interact with on levels that we haven't done before either.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting time, and we'll see how it evolves, because it can really evolve in few different ways. But I want to come back to business and really thinking about business. So what keeps me up at night when I work with enterprises is using governance not as a roadblock, but using governance as helping innovation in the right manner. I lined up starting this whole organization just because I cared about ethical AI, responsible AI. Do we have visibility into or traceability into the data when that model is making the decision? So to me, that was a big calling for me, that we are doing it right. And if you build it inside, you buy a tool, whatever helps you, I think that is important. I actually ended up taking a board position with Xnode.ai, which is a governance software, only because of my value system, which I feel that it is so, so critical. But is that something that in healthcare, I'm sure that you're thinking about it,
Yeah.
and this traceability, accountability is really important. How are you addressing it?
Oh, so one, I look at governance as strategic enablement, but you start to get into there, there's still audit
Yeah,
that needs to happen. There's still how did you get to the decision that you got to? So it's really showing your work in the proofs. So you start to look at how am I logging what was presented to people and what decisions did they make and what are the outcomes? What are the answers of it? So when you're looking at prompts, just in general, this is one where I know Stanford has their own framework for being able to do this
yeah.
stuff. And it's actually very, very practical and very usable. And you start to look at what was the question that they asked? What was the response that you get? And being able to review these things over and over to see not only the deviation, but are there the things that we should be concerned about and what are the models that work best? Very diligent work by Dr. Nigam Shah and his team around this. So that type of framework has reusability
Right.
all the way down into all of the different areas. So it's not just for large language models and summarizing of notes. This now can expand into, okay, I'm asking a dashboard question or going into something like this or producing something through generative analytics. And now I can actually go through and see the logs of what was the data that was utilized? What was the question that was asked? What was the answer? How much is it off from the expected answer? So now you're continually refining and looking at that. And before you may have had people doing this. This is where you start to get into leveraging some of the agentic tools to be able to measure how close you are to it. So it's not something that has to, is going to be automatic. You're going to have to go through it to be able to continually articulate that trust and what people are getting is on the mark. So I think it's still quite a bit of work for people to do, but I think it's worth it to be able to
Yeah.
show that trust and verify that, hey, we're using these things. And by the way, the people that are leveraging and using them are aware and are, you know, accurately leveraging those tools as well.
So technology is one, data is a, challenge. Technology of any kind could be a challenge. But when you think about the buy-in, as a chief data and analytics officer, or a chief tech officer, data, tech, information, whatever you can put in the middle, so many acronyms right now. But as the leader of technology, how do you get the buy-in? Is it, of course, everybody says top down, bottom up, all of it. But the tech leader's job is not easy because we've always seen it as a cost center, just another technology project. Do you, in your organization, is it a technology project? Is it a strategic initiative? Is it a C-suite, CEO, COO, CFO initiative? Where does it sit in Stanford? How do you see it? And how do you encourage, especially the people who are listening, to position it so that they can get the buy-in?
So at Stanford, keep in mind this is Stanford. So I don't have any backseat drivers with PhD. I mean, everybody here has an amazing background in this.
Yes.
So, you know, you're getting it from all over, but it really comes into value. So as you're trying to position any project or any technology from this, it's what value is being driven. And is this technology for technology's sake? You sure hope not. It's one thing to know technology, but what is the value that it's actually creating? And that value may be a straight ROI. Is it cost reduction? Is it a revenue increase? Or is it increased physician happiness? Look, some of the things they do just make their lives easier. So it goes into how am I applying it accordingly? And also how am I continually measuring it? Because at some point in time, the value dissipates, and is it necessary to remove that technology? I would really say, from a technology professional perspective, understand what your business does, understand the processes, understand the metrics that are important to the C-level suites, so that you're able to not just articulate technology for doing it, you're able to articulate what is the value that you're bringing to the table in order to help drive the success of what they're trying to achieve. And really, that bridging that gap is what we should all be focused on, because I think we're all focused on the outcomes of the companies that we're in together. So that's where I want to kind of say, hey, technology is really cool, but if it's not actually driving value overall for the business, then why am I doing it?
Totally agree. And I think the value conversation is so important from the very start. Karl, you've spent 30 years in the rooms that most of the people watching here will never be in, making decisions about data that affects real people's life in a way that is invisible without, something going wrong. Really think about that. And the fact that you came here and talked about this so honestly and including the parts of what doesn't work, what works, where the trust can break, and why these conversations are important, like the value conversation. And this is exactly the kind of conversation this show exists because we want to make sure that we bring these real experiences to our LinkedIn audience. So thank you for bringing it all so honestly, so humbly to the audience. So I want to thank you so much for coming to the show and sharing your experiences with us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And here's what I want to leave all of you from this conversation, three things. And I would say the three things that every leader needs to carry out from this room to your rooms. I think the first, I would say the clean data and trustworthy data, probably not the same thing. We can have a clean database, but maybe it's misleading our audience, not reading the right way. Really think about the second thing I would say is think about, do we have AI? Do we have a problem that we can solve with AI? Are we adding the value to the organization? And are we starting the value conversation from the very beginning? And lastly, are you bringing everybody along? It's trust is not just a feeling. It's about building a good roadmap, bringing the right people in the room to have the conversation as you're designing the system. This is about taking a journey. It's a journey. It's not something that can give you the results immediately, but really picking your right battles and taking those battles in the right direction. I enjoyed this conversation, Karl, with you, and I'm sure we could probably have a lot more conversations about all different angles of data and AI. But I think the journey is all about starting your journey and keep learning as you go through. Be curious in this age of learning and continue just feeding your mind with good information and building the network to be able to talk to each other. I'm Asha Saxena, your host from the AI Talk Show. I will see you next time in LinkedIn Live. Thank you so much for joining us today.